Hello and welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today we are talking about the evolution of Kes. Now, Kes is a really interesting character from Voyager all around. Like, there's a lot of things about her that are unique. She is Ocampa, which is our first time seeing this particular alien species in the Caretaker episode. She's got these telepathic abilities, but she also has telekinetic abilities, which is so cool. This is where like X-Men meets Star Trek. We also get this really creepy relationship between her and Neelix and kind of a love triangle situation with Tom Paris and just lots of layers. What I love, though, is seeing her go from this pretty naive but curious and adventurous, so therefore Starfleet material kind of person, into somebody who really comes into her own. She's got expertise not only in the medical field, because the doctor ends up taking her under his wing. And, you know, I think she becomes, I can't say as good as the doctor, because honestly, the doctor is like the best doctor in the universe, but she becomes really good. She becomes a good doctor under his mentorship and tutelage. And not only that, but she also kind of learns how to gain control over her telekinetic abilities. There are moments when she's not in a lot of control, but by the end of her storyline, we see that she is in complete control, which is really cool to see. You know, it's kind of like it took a lifetime to gain this much wisdom and knowledge and power and authority and all of these different things. So I want to start with the first episode that Kes was in. But just so you know, if you're watching on the replay, which you probably are, there are timestamps below so you can skip ahead at any time. If you're watching live, hello, welcome. Just so you know, my computer is nearly dead. Like, it is dying on me. It's crashing. The keyboard's not working. The videos aren't working. So it's going to be a time. I don't have a video for Caretaker, so I'll just describe it. I did manage to get videos for the other ones, but it was like, it was a journey. So it was a journey of love. Okay, so first time we see Kes is in the pilot, which is Caretaker Part 1 and 2. So it's a two-parter pilot, which is like a thing in Star Trek. It's just a tradition. And when we first see her, she's been captured and imprisoned by the Kazon. So we're kind of like, okay, what is going on here? Because Neelix forms this coalition partnership with Voyager and says, hey, we can go to the Kazon. The Kazon can help us find your people, because the Caretaker had kidnapped everybody, had taken all of Voyager and the entire Maquis ship and a whole bunch of other ships to the Delta Quadrant because he was looking for a suitable mate so he could make progeny who would take care of the Ocampa forever and ever, because he was dying. So whenever he would take a ship, he would sample everybody, and then the ones that he thought were like the closest match, he would hang on to those and try to like cultivate them. And then they would all ultimately die, which is a bummer. So when we start this episode, Harry Kim from the Voyager crew and B'Elanna Torres from the Maquis crew have both been kept, but everybody else has been returned to their ship. So Voyager works together with the Maquis to rescue their people. But first, they're trying to figure out how to get into the like the biodome, because they live in the core of the planet. And Neelix is like, I can help you with that. Let's just go talk to the Kazon. But really, this is a whole big trick so he can get his girlfriend back, which I'm here for that, because she needed somebody to rescue him. And I like the idea of Neelix being helpful. Like, I just like that idea. So anyways, they rescue Kes and they kind of screw over the Kazon, but that's like par for the course. That's kind of the Kazon's thing, their constant struggle. And when they get Kes back, she's like, okay, I can tell you how to get in. There's like these secret passageways or whatever. So they end up rescuing their crew and going on their way. And amazingly, Kes and Neelix end up joining the Voyager crew, which is kind of wild if you think about it, because the Ocampa, at least this group that she's grown up in, if grown up is the right word, because she's not even 2 years old, she's like a year and a half at this point. But this culture that she exists in has lived in this bubble for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years at this point. So all they know is what the Caretaker tells them. And the Caretaker is kind of like a religious figure as well as a provider. So Kes herself is pretty sheltered, but she's also very curious, which is why she got captured by the Kazon, because she was constantly going up to the surface to just check it out, see what's there. It kind of gives me Ariel vibes. You know what I mean? Like, she wants to see the people dancing, and then she gets caught up by the sea witch and it all goes downhill. But it turns out well for her. So she ends up joining the Voyager crew because she's like, this is beyond my wildest dreams. I can explore the galaxy and get off my planet. And Neelix is like, well, we don't know this at this point, but Neelix doesn't even have, his planet was destroyed with a huge bioweapon, which was awful. So he really doesn't have, he's kind of like Guinan. He doesn't really have any place else to be or anywhere to go when his homeworld is gone and all his people are scattered, the few that are remaining. So he's like, yeah, I'm down, let's go. But it's kind of crazy because think about it. If you just met somebody today and they're like, hey, I'm going to go to like, I don't know, live in some far off place that you don't know anything about. And you're just like, sounds good. I mean, I don't know. That's just like so wild to me. But this is what they choose. This is what they decide. And so Kes becomes this character who's supposed to be kind of like Janeway's daughter. And I think we saw this in TNG. Like, this was my feeling from TNG, is that at first Picard was kind of a jerk. But eventually, sorry, Nadia, I know you love him. But at first, season 1, you're kind of like, ugh. As they're trying to flesh out his character. But obviously by the end, he's amazing, right? And he becomes this, not only a mentor, but really like a father figure to most of the crew. Obviously not for Beverly and some of the other members, but for most of the crew, he does become a mentor and a father figure. And you really feel that from him. You feel like that care, that concern. You know he's going to take good care of you. And so I feel like they were trying to set Janeway up as some kind of mothering figure as well, but they didn't want it to be too non-obvious. Like with Picard, they were like, we want to really like drive home that she's a mothering type, but without giving her a kid, because we already did that with Cisco, right? So they were like, how do we do this? And we know she loves puppies, but that's not quite enough because her puppies are not on the ship with her. So they end up creating this character of Kes to be like her mentee, who she's always kind of like giving advice to and cuddling with when times are hard and all of that sort of thing. That relationship always felt kind of forced to me, to be honest. But I like the idea that they were trying to form some kind of bonds very intentionally early on. So I like that it was thought about in some way. Obviously, when Kes leaves the show and 7 of 9 joins the show, now they have to like, they try to kind of transfer that dynamic of mentor-mentee onto the new, this new relationship with this new person. And that was kind of a disaster. I mean, they did have a mentor-mentee thing going on, but it wasn't like Kes being like, Mom, teach me the way. It was more like a teenager, right? Who's just like, Mom, get out of my room. But in any case, this is where she starts. And we get to see this young person who seems just way out of her depth, really grow from here. And honestly, thank God, right? She has to grow from here. She cannot stay this character just like she is, so naive, so wide-eyed, following Neelix around all over the galaxy. She cannot stay this character and be liked in any way, in my opinion, to continue on for multiple seasons. So that's my view on this first intro experience of Kes. I'm going to check the chat and then we'll go on to the next episode on the list. Okay. It looks like a lot is going on in the chat, and most of it I don't think has anything to do with me, so nothing to respond to. So Wingrace says, I wouldn't mind some of the Kes reverse aging today. Yeah, like as long as I don't have to start old. If I can start now and then reverse a little bit, that'd be good. But she starts on like her deathbed. You're like, goodness gracious. Hello. Okay, so here is, yes, this comment from Carlos of who here does not post on YouTube. Yeah, a lot of people don't. Nadia doesn't. PS2 Chipper, I don't think you have a channel on YouTube about Star Trek. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, Wingrace is fabulous. I love that. Okay. Nadia says, Kes, I think it's insane that Jennifer Lean was so young when she got this part. She had a lot of gravitas in her acting for someone her age, in my opinion. Yeah, I think she was, at the time of the recording of the pilot episode, I think she was only like 19 or something. And that's the same age that she was actually playing, right? She was playing a 1.5-year-old Ocampan, which is maybe like an 18, 19-year-old. So that's kind of, 1.5 would probably be more like 15. We'll bump her up a little bit. She was playing like a legal aged person, but just barely when she started. And I agree with you, Nadia. She was pretty amazing to have that level of depth, because when you're watching her, even though she does seem very naive and you're kind of like, girl, at the same time, she doesn't seem like a kid. she doesn't seem like a teenager. It doesn't seem like you're watching a high school play, right? You feel like this is a legitimate actress, which she totally is. So that is super impressive. I think all good acting is super impressive. Let's see. Yeah, Nadia says, don't be talking about my husband. You know, he had some time to grow. He had to grow. So do we all. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, when it comes to Kes, there's nowhere to go for the character but up. I agree. Nadia says, I always liked her except for her hair until her final episodes in the series regular. She was sweet and bright. I didn't like the whole 9-year lifespan thing, though. Boo. Yeah, there was this weird thing about Okamans only being able to live for like 9 years, which, since they live in dog years or whatever, 9 years old is like 90 years old. So the idea is that every one of their years is like 10 of our years, which is, I think, a really interesting concept because the Okamans look very human, except for their really cool ears. So I like that they added in something unique about their biology. And as we're going to see, they added in a few more unique aspects of their biology. But that was something we haven't seen before. A character that looks humanoid, very much humanoid, but their lifespan is totally different. We've seen, I mean, I guess we have, because we've seen Vulcans who look almost identical to humans, and they live for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I think maybe they were just trying to say, like, can we do that, but remix it? Can we do that, but like a little different? Instead of being like, you're super old and you live forever, it's like you don't barely live at all, which is also kind of wild. PS2 Chipper says, I am not the biggest fan of Kes. Yeah, many people do not like this character. And I think, you know, it's one of those things, like, every character's got their fans and every character's got their detractors. And I feel like Kes has a lot of, I feel like Kes can be controversial in that way. Like, there can be things about her, like, I love Kes. I love Kes. And I think I love Kes because she grows and develops. If she stayed the same all 4 seasons, I would just like, I would hate Kes, right? But I love her because I love how like smart and capable and talented she becomes. However, my co-host for the TNG podcast, who hasn't seen a ton of Voyager, she cannot stand Kes, like cannot stand Kes at all. Granted, she's only seen a few episodes from season 1. However, it's like if you've only seen a few seasons of episode 1 of TNG, you're probably not going to love Deanna Troi. You're probably just not going to love her, right? Because you're just like, why is she walking around crying all the time? Like, what is she contributing? Like, there's something about her that might rub you the wrong way, and you're not going to get the chance to grow to love her because it takes so long. Yes, Nadia says she should start a channel on a YouTube channel about Star Trek. You totally should. You totally should. Wingray says, I never really thought of Kes as being a surrogate Janeway daughter all that much. I can see it. Nadia says, absolutely she was. I like their relationship. They had less tension than Janeway and 7 of 9. Best of Trek, worst of Trek said, at least not until Sacred Ground. Yeah, they had a lot less tension than Janeway and 7 of 9 for good reason, right? Because of all the shifts happening in the show when 7 of 9 came on. But also, this kind of reminds me of the really sweet relationship between 7 of 9 and Naomi Wildman, which is just like, it's just really beautiful, right? It's like, there's something about it. There's no pretext there. It's just like, we just like each other and we like to hang out. And I think it's really sweet. And I feel like there's a similar kind of innocence between the Janeway Kes bond. And there's definitely none of that between Janeway and 7 of 9. It's all like, it's all tension. It's all headbutting. Yeah. Carlos says, Kes reminds me of someone who has a sheltered life, but in a way, her life kind of started like that. Yeah, she was absolutely sheltered. She was 100, 1,000, 1,000,000% sheltered, but somehow she was able to get onto this starship, which she's never been on a starship, and start flying across the galaxy and meeting new people and going to new places and getting attacked by the Vidians. And she just took it all in her stride, learning about medicine. I mean, it's really interesting to think that someone with that upbringing could lead that kind of a life. PS2 Chipper says, the Star Trek writers, my contract is only for 3 seasons. Kes's lifespan and the next writer's is the next writer's problem. My contract's for 3 seasons. I don't know what y'all are going to do with Kes once she's like 60. Wingray says, I like Kes more post Neelix. Yeah, I did too, but I don't know if I like Kes more post Neelix or if I like Neelix more post Neelix, post Kes and Neelix. I think I like Neelix more without them being a couple. Because whenever Kes, and I like Kes more whenever she was not around him, right? Because like Kes could just be herself without being like infantilized. You know, she could just talk and walk and act without him being like, sweetie, that's not how we do things, sweetie. You know what I mean? So I think I liked her more in scenes without him, and I definitely liked him more without her. Like I liked him just doing his thing, cooking up Leola root, you know? I like that version of him too. Yes, she did meet a man from her race who Carlos asked, didn't she meet a man from her race who was 14? She did meet a man from her race. We're going to talk about that episode a little later. I don't remember how old he was though. So if you remember 14, I'll take your word for that. But yeah, he had like lived past the 9-year lifespan and kind of opened her mind to possibilities to be like, oh, we don't all have to die at 9 years old. Like there is more to life. And he opened her mind in a lot of ways. Yeah. Nadia says, yep, that weird guy who was shady and serving the female caretaker. He did end up being super shady, but he didn't seem shady at first. He just seemed like he wanted to guide her and mentor her. And then he turned into a total creep. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, yes, a 14-year-old Ocampa played by the late, great Gary Graham, who played the Vulcan ambassador in Enterprise. I love it when they do that. Okay. Let's go. It was a guess. Good guess, Carlos. Okay, let's go to the next episode on the list. And since it's the evolution of Kes, it's just going to go in chronological order of her story.
Season 1, Episode 4, Time and Again. After an explosion devastates a planet, Janeway and Paris are transported back in time to the days leading up to the disaster. As they attempt to stop the catastrophe, they get kidnapped by terrorists who are against polaric energy. Janeway eventually realizes that Voyager caused the explosion in the first place, so she's able to prevent it the second time around.
So this episode is only the, gosh, hold on, let me check. I think it's, what did I just say, the 4th episode? Yeah, it's the 4th episode of the show, 3rd, 4th, depending on if you count the 2-parter as 1 episode or 2 episodes. But anyways, it's very early on. And Kes is so critical in this episode. It's Kes to the rescue. I mean, granted, Janeway is the one who realizes that she's the problem, that she's the drama, and she's the one who fixes it. However, Kes is the one that knows that Janeway and Tom Paris have not been killed because she can sense them telepathically. And that's something that Tuvok cannot do, even though he is also a telepath. So there's some more layers to being Ocampan. It's not just telepathic, which means you can read people's thoughts, but she's got some kind of supernatural empathy. She can read other people's feelings, like she can feel them. She can feel them around. And as we're going to see later on, there's telekinesis where she can move things with her mind. These are things that Tuvok cannot do. He can read minds, and that is all. And he can't read all minds. And he can also mind meld, which, as far as I know, Kes can't do on her own. But we've seen other non-Vulcans do mind melding. I think we saw, didn't we see Picard do that once? And then we were like, oh, I guess you don't have to be Vulcan. Or maybe it's because he mind melded with Sarek that he learned, you know, the way or something like that. I don't know. But anyways, she can do a lot of things that Tuvok can't do. And this is the episode where it comes out. And it's really cool because like in the beginning, there's this planet and Kes has this nightmare where she's like, oh my gosh, everyone on the planet has died. And of course, Neelix is like, you're fine. You're good. It was a nightmare. And she's like, no, I know it. Like she even felt that. And she comes onto the bridge and she's like, Captain, what's happened? And it's like the planet's just all dead, you know, and they're trying to figure it out. But she knew that happened. It was kind of like a Guinan moment in yesterday's Enterprise where the whole timeline shifted and Guinan was like, the timelines changed. She just felt it, right? That's what was going on with Kes. And there was a time shift in this as well. So they go, as when they're on the planet, they disappear, Tom and Janeway, and Kes can feel them. She's like, nope, they're alive. And she can also feel like they were right here. Like they were in this room. They were in this area. Like she's using some kind of GPS inside of her, some kind of psychic bloodhound thing she has to track them down because they think that's how they're going to save them. They're going to open a rift and like pull them back through and then close the rift. But opening that rift was what caused the explosion. Anyways, Janeway figures it out. They close the rift in time and then time resets. So then she wakes up and she's like, I think time just reset. And I think that planet that died is now alive. But what if it's not? Let me go check. And so she goes back to the bridge and she's like, Captain, can you put the planet on the view screen? And the planet is like green and beautiful and wonderful. And then they go, oh man, the planet's pre-warp. So first prime directive, we can't talk to them. What a bummer. And they just keep flying on. And she's just like, oh my gosh, you know, and I love this for her. This is a huge development in just basically one episode, right? That we've seen because there was nothing to do in Parallax. There was nothing for anyone to do. That was more about the Maquis crew and the Voyager crew getting along, right? So this is where we get to see Kes has some special abilities. And what I hate, back to what we were saying earlier, is the way Neelix just like totally dismisses her and mansplains to her and is just like, you don't have any special abilities. You're just a regular person. You're just a young little girl, you know, on my coattails, going on a trip or whatever. And she's like, but my people have these latent abilities. We just never developed them under the Caretaker's watch because we didn't need them, because we had everything we needed. So we stopped developing our mental powers, but that doesn't mean we couldn't develop them. And that was also her complaint back on her planet, where she was saying everybody has lost the ability to kind of think for themselves and do for themselves because they're so used to being pampered and cared for. And she was like, that's wrong. We need to go back to the old ways where we actually knew how to take care of ourselves, which I guess they figured out after the Caretaker died. We don't know. Inquiring minds will never know. But I loved seeing that. I loved seeing that she has these abilities. And even though Neelix was like, no, you don't have them, she was like, I'm pretty sure I do. And she used them to like partially save the day. And then I also love that they kept iterating on that same theme. They kept being like, well, how can we do something with her abilities? I love that they did that because that makes her character so interesting and like unique and different. And also I love her relationship with the Doctor. I love that they're friends. I love that she's his biggest advocate, his biggest cheerleader, that she's the reason that he gained any amount of independence over his own program, to turn himself off when people leave the room, you know, to be able to grow beyond his program, to learn opera and all these things, painting and stuff like that. He wouldn't have done any of that without Kes. And I think the Doctor is one of the other characters that I'd probably say grow the absolute most over a course of 7 seasons. It's Kes and the Doctor, except for Kes didn't make it all 7. That's why, you know, we have to give the Doctor the prize. But if we were only counting the first 3 seasons, it would definitely be Kes. Okay. I'm going to check the chat and then we'll go to the next episode on the list. Okay, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, the children of the candy corn clothes, colorful vertical stripes look so terrible. Wingrave says, man, those candy corn costumes have been getting so much play lately. Yeah, really, we've been talking a lot about those candy corn costumes. And it kind of makes me want to eat candy corn, although I hate candy corn, right? Because like it's not good, but I used to love it as a kid, even though it wasn't good, just because it looked fun. So something about seeing those costumes makes me want to eat the candy that I know I definitely do not want to eat. PS2 Chipper says, Tuvok also needs to touch to read minds. He does not have to touch to read minds. If you... he has to touch to mind meld, but he doesn't have to touch to read minds. He just has to be with another species that is telepathic. So there's that episode. There's that episode called Random Thoughts, where B'Elanna has a mean thought, and then it like goes all around this little like alien city, and everyone's like bashing each other over the head because this thought is like running wild, and they have to like take her mind and clean the thought and like purge it from the community and all that stuff. So that whole society was telepathic. And that's why bad thoughts were a crime, because they were all telepathic. So when Tuvok was ever talking to like their lead cop, their lead investigator person, they spoke a lot of times in their minds. Like just like walking down the hall or walking down the street, they would just talk to each other in their minds. And she would be like, why don't you talk like this all the time? Why do you always use your voice? And he says like, well, because nobody else on my ship, there's a couple other Vulcans, but he's like, nobody else on my ship is telepathic. So I don't want to leave them out of the conversation. Now, I do know they can't read all minds. Like all telepaths can't read all minds, but the Ocampa can do even more than that with their mental abilities, which is super cool. Oh, that's what I was thinking of, PS2 Chipper. Picard did the Vulcan neck pinch. That's what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking, okay, he didn't do mind melding. He did the neck pinch. So I feel like maybe only Vulcans can mind meld, but I do feel like everybody can neck pinch, at least according to Spaceballs. I feel like everybody can neck pinch. Nadia says, I still think it's crazy that Vulcans didn't mind meld until Enterprise. It seems so weird because they knew they had telepathic abilities for ages. Remember the crazy Vulcan mind weapon in TNG? Mm-hmm. Vulcans didn't mind meld until Enterprise? Like they'd never done it before? Huh. PS2 Chipper says, good thing I never watched Enterprise. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek told me it gets better, though. So Nadia says there's some good stuff in it, but I think they missed a good opportunity. They could have covered more when it comes to the formation of the Federation. That's so interesting. I'm still going to watch it. Okay, let's go to the next episode on the list, which this is a hard one to watch.
Season 2, Episode 4, Elogium. Voyager has its hands full dealing with a swarm of giant space-dwelling life forms that seem a little too interested in the ship. At the same time, Kes suddenly enters a weirdly intense biological phase that means it's now or never if she wants kids. In the end, Kes decides to pass on the whole baby thing, and the doctor concludes that the space creatures brought on the Elogium artificially, so she might be able to get another shot in 2 to 3 years.
This episode, I remember how traumatic this was the first time I saw it. I was like, what's going on? What's happening to Kes? Why is her tongue swelling? Why is she eating dirt? I mean, this episode, I don't even know. I don't know if this is a good episode or a bad episode, honestly. I don't know if it's like, oh, back to my thing I was saying about showing humanoid-like species, but they have different biological processes, which I find fascinating. This definitely shows that, right? This is like, let's do like a different kind of biological process. It's kind of similar, right? It's got some echoes, but let's do it differently. Like, let's make it bigger, let's make it different, let's make it more alien. And I don't know, like I remember watching this and just being really horrified for Kes and really concerned. And apparently the Elogium, which I looked up how to say that word today, and I also looked at the definition of that word today. The Elogium in this context is their like ponfar. It's like their mating time, but it only happens once in a female Ocampant's life. And it happens when they're around 4 or 5, which is interesting. So they don't get pregnant till they're 40 or 50 years old. So that's usually when it kicks in. And it only happens once, apparently. So I guess each Ocampant gets exactly 1 child. So make it count. And so she starts going through this prematurely. And the doctor thinks it's because of all these like space slugs or whatever. And these like fields that they're radiating, that they're emitting, that like triggered something in her for this to happen early. But my goodness, give me Ponfar any day, okay? Because when they get Ponfar, they just kind of like sweat and they get a little stressed out. And they go have a good time, and then they're all good. But all of this is nuts, okay? Like her tongue was swelling. She's eating dirt and like grass and like whatever. Her hands get covered in these little like pustules, and she's got to touch her mate with the pustules because it causes a connection with their skin or something. Like, and if you see what she looks like in this episode, like her eyes are all dark and she's sweating and she's got a fever. And I mean, this is worse than this seems worse than whatever outcome you could have from it. It's just so bad, and it just keeps going and going and going. And she's like, okay, well, because she says in this episode, she goes, but I'm barely 2. This only happens when you're 4 or 5. I'm barely 2. How is this happening already? And so she's in her mind like, wow, okay, it triggered early. Who knows why? But it did. So now I have to have a baby right now or never, and that's it. And her only option is Neelix. Do we want this baby? Do we want this union between the two of them? Because I don't. Like, I get that they're dating and great, you're exploring the universe and this relationship and things like that. But bringing a baby into it means you guys will have to always co-parent, even from different ships. You know what I mean? Like, you guys will be in each other's lives forever. And at this point, that's exactly what they both want. But yikes, right? So because Kes is so young, again, she's like 18, goodness gracious. I mean, not that 18-year-olds can't have kids, but you know what I mean? Like, it's such a young age to make those kinds of decisions. And she is like, I'm not sure. And Neelix is like, I'm in. Like, if you're ready to have a kid, I'm ready to have a kid. I'm totally in, which is, he would honestly make the sweetest father. Because we see what he's like with Naomi Wildman. He's amazing. He's incredible. He would make a wonderful father. Let's just hope that kid would be a boy. So he would not train her. I don't know. Like, something about him having another girl makes bile rise in me. But anyways, she decides, you know what? I would rather not have a kid than rush to have a kid because, my biological clock is ticking so loud that my entire, body has switched onto this. I'm just going to let it pass. I'm going to let the Elogium pass and hope for the best in the future. And if not, then not, which I think is a very sensible decision. And in the end, the doctor's like, well, I think this actually was triggered by those space things. So you actually might be fine. Like, you probably didn't need to do all that. Like, you didn't need to have a baby right now. So like, you probably will be good. We don't know for sure. But honestly, she's in such good hands with the doctor, because even if something, the time has passed or whatever, certainly he could analyze the field that was being produced by these alien creatures and reproduce it when she's 4 or 5. Like, I just honestly feel like the doctor could do anything if you give him enough time. So I wouldn't even worry. I mean, it's so early in the show, we don't know this about him, but like, if she wanted to have a kid later on, the doctor would be able to make that happen. Let's go. Like, he would figure that out. Anyways, this episode's really hard to watch. It is definitely not on my rewatch list. I've only seen it probably 2 or 3 times ever in life because it makes me feel so uncomfortable. However, now that I'm an adult and now that I'm 4 years old in Ocampan years, I could, you know, maybe if I rewatched it, I'd have a totally different perspective on it. I don't know if it'd be a better perspective or a worse perspective, but maybe it wouldn't be as traumatic now as a grown-up as it was when I was a teenager watching this show, watching this particular episode. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we'll go to the next episode on the list. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, like TNG, Enterprise gets better after the first season and a half. You really sold me on that, Dustin. Like, I was kind of like, Enterprise, because I watched the first season or the first half of the first season. I don't know. I didn't get to the end of the first season for sure. I don't know where I stopped exactly, but I remember being like, this is boring. I don't want to watch this anymore. But you were the one who was like, no. Like, trust me, like, keep going. It gets better. So I don't remember what else you said, but you totally sold me. Wingrace says they did mind meld prior to Enterprise, but they wanted to use it as an AIDS allegory. So it was more like a secret thing kept out of the light. Ooh, that's interesting. So their mind melding was a secret, which actually, but before Enterprise, like, they didn't even know the Vulcans existed, right? Like, so, but that makes sense. Like, it was more of like maybe a hidden cultural thing that wasn't, that general people, the general Federation did not know about them. That's interesting. Nadia says, ugh, this episode was so weird. I mean, it's bad enough when you think about where babies come out of in humans, but in Ocampa, the babies come out of their back. Ugh. Yeah, this is that. We're going to see that in the later episode. Well, we're not going to see that part because I definitely did not record that because that was gross. But yeah. It's not like there's no scenario where it's not gross. No matter where the baby's coming out, human, animal, what have you, insect, what have you, whenever the baby's coming out, it's always kind of like, maybe tadpoles. Tadpoles aren't that gross. Maybe chickens, dinosaurs. Maybe there's a handful of things where you're like, oh, how interesting, but like most of the things, it's kind of gross. This episode makes you not want to procreate. Not if you have to go through all of that. Like, everything she went through was wild. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, this is not a great episode. But Jennifer Lee's face as she's literally chewing the scenery and Neelix is dragging her to sick bay was pretty funny. She was literally chewing the scenery. There's a scene where she's just like got food all around her and she's just eating everything. But you know they have to make it look like space food. So I don't know what she was eating. I don't know if it was like plums and like straight up onions and potatoes. Like, I don't know what these things were, but they were things you could bite into that looked alien. I don't know. I hope for her sake they were just very well painted Jell-O, or maybe like, you know, like, is it cake? Maybe it was like a is it cake thing. I would do it if it was is it cake. I would eat all the stuff on the set if it was like a is it cake, but it looks like a flower, but you know, it's really cake. But yeah, oof. Carla says, oh, the rubbing feet for 10 hours or longer. Yuck. Yeah. The doctor didn't mind it though. So you got that. You got a hologram who can't get tired of rubbing your feet. So that's kind of nice. PS2 Chipper says those skin secretion spider webs were a huge turn off. Yeah, it was gross. It was super gross. And it's worse on like high def. Like, it's worse now watching in HD than it was back then when it was like a little fuzzy, a little blurry. And you could see there was some gross stuff going on. But this was like, you can see all the little, I'm done talking now. Nadia says, yep, Ponfar is way better. And then she says, I don't know. I think Kes and Neelix would have had a cute, jovial baby. Their baby would have been pretty happy. Their baby would have been pretty happy, I have to say. And I think Neelix would have made a really sweet dad, and Kes would have made a great mom. Why not? PS2 Chipper says, I think Tom Paris was another baby daddy option. Yes, we're going to see that in another episode as well. Wingrace says, imagine being Neelix and having an Ocampan kid that will live and die in less than a decade of your life. I know. And that's kind of like, Wingrace, to your point, that's kind of what you have to consider when you get in a relationship with an Ocampan, right? Because your whole relationship is only going to be 10 years long or less. Your whole relationship. So if you meet them at 2 Or in this case, somehow they met before she was 2, Neelix. But if you meet at 2 years old and fall in love and get married the next day, you still are only going to have 10 years together, which is so heartbreaking. And then if you can't have a kid until they're 4 or 5, then you get another 10 years with that kid. It's just, yeah, it's really heartbreaking. I would imagine this must be how Vulcans feel when they marry humans, right? Since they live for hundreds and hundreds of years. Does anybody know how long a Vulcan lives? A long time, right? They probably feel that same way, where their human partner does not live as long as them. I don't know what happens to their kids. I don't know if they inherit half the lifespan, or I'm not really sure. Carlos says, I thought she was into Tom. It was Tom who was into her. Best of Trek, Worst Trek says she was into Tom, but not yet. Yeah, I don't think she was. It was Tom who was into her. And Tom is very charming. So he's kind of into everyone on the ship. But he was making more of a run at Kes. And I think they were trying to do the love triangle tension drama thing, which I think actually worked. Carlos says, wouldn't the baby get a longer life because Neelix's lifespan is longer? Yeah, maybe. That's why I'm like, I'm not really sure. So however long Talaxians live and however long Alcompans live, maybe they would split the difference and their kid would live longer. I don't know. Nadia says, only a small portion of Vulcans mind meld. What? No way. I thought all the Vulcans could do that. Vulcans in mainstream didn't know it was a thing. I did not know all Vulcans couldn't do that. That feels like kind of a ripoff. If you're Vulcan, you can't do it. Okay, on that note, let's check out the next episode on the list.
Season 2, Episode 8, Persistence of Vision. The crew starts seeing super realistic hallucinations, and things get creepy fast as they start losing their grip on reality. Luckily for them, Kes's psychic powers help her fight back while everyone else is incapacitated. However, before they can take the attacking alien into custody, he mysteriously disappears.
I actually like this episode. I like the idea of it. I think it's really interesting. They do it a couple more times though. So I don't know. Does it lose its power? I'm going to say no, because I like it when they do it again. But in this episode, they're trying to go and meet these alien species called the Bothans. And the Bothans are like really hard to get in contact with, and they're really mysterious and all this stuff. So they're trying to meet with them, and they're trying to connect with them and all these things. While they're going into Bothan space, they all start hallucinating. And so the creepy stuff you saw with Janeway, that was her Jane Eyre holodeck program. That was like, the program was creepy before any of the holograms came out of that program. It was already creepy. I don't think it was supposed to be a horror, but it definitely felt like a horror watching it. But in any case, those characters started popping up in her everyday world, like on the ship. And she was like, what the heck is going on? I must be hallucinating. And at one point, she sees a character that like tries to stab her and all this stuff. And she goes to sickbay and she's like, I don't know what's wrong. And then everyone in the crew starts seeing things. They start seeing people. Then there's a scene where the ship is finally coming into contact with, I guess, like a Bothan ship or a space station or something. I don't know. But they're on the view screen. And the Bothan is like in the back, in the dark, sitting in a chair. And they can't see what this person looks like. And so they're like, we can't really see you. Can you come closer? And so they get up and they slowly walk to the front of the view screen. And when they get to the front of the view screen, they look different to every single person on the bridge. So to Janeway, it looks like her boyfriend, Mark, or her fiance, Mark, who's back on Earth. To Tuvok, it looks like his wife, probably T'Pel, because I feel like all Vulcan women are named T'Pel or T'Pol. And then it's probably like Admiral Paris for Tom's dad or whatever. It's just like everybody's sees something different and they're all like, oh my gosh, it's you. And somehow this ability, this psionic field, this ability to like make people hallucinate also makes them pass out. They can only hallucinate so much before they just lose consciousness. So everyone's passed out except for Kes and the doctor. And the doctor is like, of course he's going to be fine, but he does need the crew to like run the ship. And Kes is like last woman standing, and she's on her way to engineering so that she can turn on the shields to block the psionic field or something like that. And then it'll wake everybody up. And so the doctor is like on the comms talking to her because he doesn't have a mobile emitter yet. So he's walking her through the process because she's like, do you know how to do that? Because I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do anything on the ship. I'm not an engineer. So he's like, I'll walk you through the process. I'll tell you which, panel to go and click or whatever. I'm reading the manual right now. So she runs to engineering to go do it. And then suddenly Neelix shows up and starts being really mean and like abusive and all this stuff. I don't think he hits her abusive, but like mean and like yelling and all this stuff, acting crazy. And then he like stares at her, and that's when you see her face get covered with all those boils, and those boils are like painful, and she's screaming and she's in pain. And the doctor's like, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. He's just messing with you. It's all in your head. And Kes is like, wait a minute, I want to take this. And she looks back at him and she like gives him the death stare. And then all the boils and pus and pain goes on him. And that's when you see Neelix, who is covered with pus, and he hits the ground and he's like writhing in pain and all of this. And then he just morphs back into the alien. And he looks back up at her and he goes, powerful little thing, aren't you? I love that. I want that on a t-shirt. I just love that line. That's like my favorite line of that whole episode. And she's just like, yeah, stay right there, buddy. So he's now incapacitated. He's laying on the ground. They shut off the psionic field. Everybody wakes up. So now Janeway comes to talk to him. He's still on the floor this whole time. So whatever she did to him, he wasn't able to like get up and run or whatever. And she's over to him and she's like, we can't, we don't know how your technology works, but we can make sure you see justice one way or another. We can find some kind of court or some kind of cell or some kind of way to block your ability, some kind of hypo spray that keeps you from doing what you do. We will make a way, sir. Okay, we've got time. We've got nothing but time. We're here for 70 years. We're going to find a way for you to not do this again. And he's like, well, how can you do that if I'm not even really here? And then he disappears. And you're like, what? Like, what the heck? Was he there? Was he not there? Was even that a hallucination? Was it just in his mind? There's so many questions. And what I love about the way this episode ends is it just stops there. They don't answer those questions. You just see them all being really disturbed. And they're like, let's get out of both in space. And that's it. And it just makes them kind of question what's real, what's not real. And that's it. I actually love that they leave it there, that they don't try to explain it, because I think explaining it would take away from the power. And I like having that mystery where you're like, wait a minute, what just happened? So that's a really cool ending. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we'll go to the next episode on the list. Nadia says, oh, I love that actress who played the governess in Janeway's weirdo hollow novel. She played so many roles in the Star Trek universe. Oh my gosh, wasn't she a Romulan at one point? Was that her? Was she the Romulan from that episode where Troy was like turned into a Romulan? Was that her also? Or am I just getting them mixed up? In the ST universe, she always knocked them out of the park. Yeah, she was super freaking creepy. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, any episode with her can't be all bad. The plot's pretty mediocre, but it does give Kes some development. PS2 Chipper says, the line powerful little thing, aren't you? Should have caught on like tough little ship. It totally should have. Dadia says, yep. It totally should. Oh, yeah, you're saying yes to like, that's the same woman who played that Romulan. Yeah, you just like, when you said she's been in so many things, I was like, she does look familiar. But this may be one of the few times where she plays a human, right? Which is kind of fun. How many times can you say that? So Best Trek, Worst of Trek says, yes, she was the Romulan commander in TNG, plus she was a scientist from the TNG episode First Contact. Okay, now let's go to the next episode on the list.
Season 2, Episode 10, Coldfire. Voyager finds a space station of Ocampa with exceptional mental abilities. Apparently, they've been mentored by the female caretaker for over 300 years. Tanis offers to help Kes unlock her full potential, but after she nearly boils Tuvok to death, she changes her mind. Also, Suspiria tries to destroy Voyager in revenge for killing the caretaker. It's a whole thing.
There's so much going on in this episode that I kind of forgot, because I think of them as two different episodes in my mind for some reason. I think of them as the super advanced Ocampan, the 14-year-old Ocampan who can do magic tricks with his mind. And then I think of it as like, oh, the caretaker's mate wants revenge, as like two different things. And I realized why today. It's because the caretaker doesn't show up, the female caretaker doesn't show up until there's like, I don't know, 10 minutes left in the episode or something. She shows up at the very end, because the whole first part is Tanis trying to convince Kes to come with them and to leave Voyager and to develop her abilities, and she'll be with other people like her, and she's going to be able to grow so much. And look at him, he's 14 and he looks like he's only 3, like she can live forever and all this stuff. And he's like constantly trying to woo her. And even with the whole making the cup boil thing, she did that. She had to do that because we see her do it again when she nearly kills Tuvok. But he was definitely helping in some way, like controlling it or locking it down or making it very, very narrow or something like that. So that way it was nice and safe. So he was really trying to seduce her into coming with the other Ocampa. And had she done that, so what happened is at the end, he was like, come like to our space station or come wherever. And really Suspiria, the female caretaker, was like, bring them to me. Like, I want justice, bring them to me. So Tanis's whole thing was we're going to take the ship to her so she can get her revenge, but we're going to save Kes out of the rest of them so that she can live with us. And then that didn't work out. So at first, though, she was like, yeah, this sounds good. And then he takes her to the aeroponics bay, and he's like, look what I can do. And he turns himself orange, and then all the plants grow and they're all colorful. And he's like, you can, don't you feel that fire inside of you from before, that one that almost killed Tuvok? She's like, yeah. And he's like, just like unleash it inside of you. And she like feels the power, and then fire just bursts from her and kills every single thing in the room. And she collapses, and he goes over to her and is like, wasn't that amazing? Like, look at all that power. And she was like, wait, did I do that? Did I like kill everything in the room? Where she's like, I do want to use my powers, but like, I only want to use them for good, and I want to be able to control them. This is more just like chaos, right? But still extremely tempting. And Tuvok had been trying to help her unlock her powers, trying to help her explore them more using all his Vulcan techniques. But it's a very methodical, slow and steady approach, right? And he definitely can't train her the way a trained, like an actual Ocampan with years and years of knowledge on this can train her. Like, he can't do that because he's not them, and he doesn't know what their capabilities are. So in one sense, it's kind of cool to see what Ocampan can do. On the other hand, it's a little bit of a bummer to know, like, this is not really accessible to her in her current environment. There's only so much she can do with Tuvok. There's only so far she can go. However, these people seem crazy. So maybe it's for the best. It's kind of like Data with that emotions chip that Lore stole. And he was like, you can have your emotions chip, but only if you rule the Borg with me. And it's like, okay, well, I want the emotions chip, but all of that, I don't want to do all that. It's like this. It's like, I want her to grow and develop in her abilities, but these people are kind of crazy. Or like not totally above board, which is what we were talking about earlier, that guy, Tanis, seems super shady. Like at first he's like, kind of cool. You're like, okay, a mentor. But then you start noticing the way he's always looking at her and like analyzing her and you're like, what's your ulterior motive? In the end, when the female caretaker loses her mind, she's just like, she goes wild. And the only way they're able to get out of that situation is that Janeway had the doctor make up some kind of something that would like incapacitate the female caretaker. So they were able to, but they couldn't get near her because she's super strong. So Kes ended up like attacking Tanis, and somehow, and I don't remember this part because I haven't seen this episode in a while, Tanis and like all these Ocampa are connected to the female caretaker in some kind of way. So Kes attacks Tanis, and when he feels pain, the female caretaker feels pain. So she's like distracted, and that gives Janeway time to like attack her. And then they're both like, they're not dead or anything like that, but they do leave Voyager alone. They leave, they go back to their own ship, they do their own thing, and Voyager's allowed to leave and go do their own thing. So all's well that ends well, but man, this was like, there's like a lot going on. There's just a lot going on in this episode. What I love is we get the Magic School Bus moment of them like zooming into the molecules of coffee in the cup, like spinning around and boiling over, which I think is just kind of fun. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then we will go to the next episode on the list. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, there's a lot going on here, and I'm kind of disappointed Suspiria never showed back up. Yeah, that would have, where do you think she would have shown back up at? Because she's also got these Ocampa that she's responsible for that are out there developing their abilities for funsies, I guess, because they're just like living in their little bubble for hundreds of years. So like in what scenario would they have come into contact again, especially since it was like a space station and not a ship? So I'm not sure how that could have happened, but it would have been interesting. It would have been interesting, especially if it was some kind of reveal, right? Where we're like, who's that kid? And you're like, oh my gosh, it's that same kid. You know what I mean? Like that could have been interesting. Carlos says, did he live longer because he evolved more and the others couldn't from being underground? Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, it's unclear if it's just because they're not underground or if Suspiria sustains them longer. It's not clear, but my vote is that Suspiria sustains them longer. That it's more having to do with how they are exceeding expectations in all ways, is how I've always read it. More so than like, oh, they just needed sunlight and that would give them a couple more years. Because, presumably they don't have sunlight on their space station unless there's a really big star nearby and they like open their windows for a few hours a day. Okay, now let's check the next episode on the list, which is also kind of hard to watch.
Season 3, Episode 10, Warlord. Kes's body gets hijacked by a dying warlord, and suddenly she's leading a military coup and acting like an absolute tyrant. The crew scrambles to free her while she lays waste to her enemies. They are able to help Kes throw Tyrion out of her mind, and she's able to destroy him for good after 200 years of his power mongering.
So this is another one that's not on my rewatch list. I remember like it made me feel so uncomfortable as a kid. And I think it was for a couple of reasons. I think it was weird to see Kes behaving in such an un-Kes-like manner. I think that was really hard. And then also Tyrion is just a terrible person. Like this person who's taken over her body is just like, he's power hungry. He's a liar. He's a cheater. He just like doesn't believe in anything but himself. He doesn't care who he kills. Like he accidentally kills one of his best friends and closest partners. He's just a terrible person. And it's like two things I don't like. This terrible person and trapped inside of this lovely person. And it's just like, it's really hard. However, that being said, this is another one I've only seen a couple of times in life. However, just when I was preparing for today's conversation and like re-going over this episode and kind of looking back through it, I was like, you know what though? I bet this was so fun to play. I bet this was so fun to act. So I do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons campaigns with this small group of friends where we just like do these games. And the last game we did, I was a rogue, which is just like, you know, like a scamp. And it was so much fun. Like I think it was my second time being a rogue. I'm usually a bard. So I'm usually the kind of character who just does like singing and performances and like, you know, kind of like just fun little shows or whatever. But I was like, let's mix it up. This time, let's be kind of like a rogue and some like a half-reformed criminal or something like that. And it's so much fun to play. Like my normal personality is not somebody who goes around and like steals and cheats and all those things because I think they're wrong. But that's what makes it fun to do it in like a game form. Because definitely when we're playing those games, I'm like, okay, I want to pick their pockets. Okay, I want to look in their purses. Okay, I want to, you know, break into their house. Like just do crazy stuff because it's all fake. So I feel like this probably was a really fun episode to write and a really fun episode to act in for the actress who plays Kes, because it's like so different, so completely different from what you've played before. There's a lot of layers to this episode. There's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of action. You're like, what is going on? And then you figure out like, oh, he jumped into her consciousness. And then like when she's taking over, people are like, is that you, Tyrion? And then we come to find out he's been doing this for hundreds of years. Like he used to be in charge and then he was like kicked out. And then he's been like jumping through mines for 200 years so he can come back and rule again. That's terrifying. You know, best of Trek, worst of Trek, from your point of why did they bring back Suspiria? Why did they bring back this idea? Like this idea of like the consciousness jumping for hundreds of years and like having some agenda. This could have elevated the episode conspiracy in TNG, right? If it wasn't giant creepy spiders or scorpions, but if it was something where it was like a little more calculating over a long period of time, could have been really interesting. Anyways, I'm going to check your thoughts on this episode in the chat, and then we'll go to the next episode on the list. Nadia says, Warlord is a crazy episode because the Warlord is crazy. It's crazy. And the whole time you're just like, what is going on? Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, this is the first episode where we finally get to see her acting range. Not a great episode, but well acted by Jennifer Leigh. I mean, I think it's fine. Like, yeah, it's not on my rewatch list. True. But I wouldn't say it was a bad. Yeah, I guess I agree with you. It's a fine episode. It's like, it's perfectly fine, right? There's a lot going on. It's exciting. It's interesting. There's a lot of mystery. It's uncomfortable. It's got a lot of things. It's got a lot of layers. When Grace says, I'm not a big fan of this episode, but it is nice to see Jennifer getting to play. Basically, it's what Botwat said, but not as good. And then we fell into a D&D rabbit hole where PS2 Chipper says, I'm always a cleric. You know what? I was thinking of being like, I don't know. I was thinking of doing like one of the religious ones, but like, I don't know. I was like, I think next time I want something with more power. Yes, ranger. Like maybe I'll be a ranger because rangers can like talk to animals. And like one of the people in our group was a ranger and he kept just like summoning beasts to fight. He was just like, he would roll the dice and he'd be like, I summon a bear. bear would come and attack, and then he'd be like, I summoned an eagle. And I was like, that's kind of dope. Like, that's pretty cool. I think I might do a ranger next time. Best of Trek, worst of Trek. I'm not putting that on the screen. Nadia says, I still maintain that conspiracy was the biggest missed opportunity in TNG. They should have revisited it. The episode was so good and scary, and it set us up for a sequel. I would kind of rather see these creepy scorpions come back than how they ended up having the Cardassians being like, in the next episode in Neutral Zone, they had the Cardassians be like, we're back. We're back. You thought we were gone, but we're back. And then you don't see them again until like season 3. I would have rather had like the Scorpions do another, just like one more cameo. Maybe they find the home world, or maybe they find a planet that's been infested by these scorpion things. And they're like, did you see the thing from their neck? We know what this is. I don't know. It could have been interesting, but also like it was creepy and gross. So I'm a little torn on whether or not I actually want a sequel to that particular story. Okay, now to the next episode on the list.
Season 3, episode 21, Before and After. Kes starts aging backward and jumps through different points in her own timeline. She even sees an alternate life where she and Tom Paris have a family, and Harry Kim is married to their daughter. No comment. And she catches a glimpse of a future where Voyager is at war with the Krenim. Luckily, somehow, it all resets in the end.
So this episode always gets me because in the episode she talks about the Krenim, which is from the Year of Hell episode, which doesn't happen for like many episodes after this. So every time when I do the rewatch and I get to this episode, I'm always like, wait, did that happen? Did that already happen, or did that not happen? Wait, where am I in the, like, it throws me off. And also seeing her big hair change. This is the hair change that you were talking about, Nadia. That's glorious. I love her hair like this. She looks so beautiful. She looks so mature. And I hate that tiny little wig from season 1. I just want to like rip it off her head and burn it. But I think the reason why I hate it is because it's sitting like a solid 4 inches off of the top of her scalp. And that's probably because she had really long hair in real life. And they had to like bundle it and then put the wig on top. And that's why it was like sitting so far up. In any case, I hated it. And so this, I love her like glorious hair. This probably also is a wig, but it's just more beautiful in my opinion. Anywho, aside from her hair, this episode, we get to see her kind of Benjamin Button, and we see all the different things that have happened in her life. So it starts out with her kind of on her deathbed. And then you see her a little bit younger, having a birthday with Tom. And then you see her, you know, meeting with Harry Kim and her daughter, and her grandson's like 12 or whatever. Who knows? Who knows? Because it's Ocampin plus human, so who knows? And then you kind of like see when her baby's born, and that's how we see that Ocampins give birth through their back, which is gross. And then we see like they go back a little further, and this is before B'Elanna died, because apparently B'Elanna dies at some point in this storyline. And so she runs over to Tom to be like, Tom, I really need to talk to you. And then B'Elanna comes up and like the kiss, and she's like, oh, you must be B'Elanna. And she's like, must be B'Elanna? Like, we've been friends for years. Yeah, I'm B'Elanna, right? And she's like, oh, and then it's super awkward. And it actually goes back to her being a kid. Like, she finally figures out what's going on and why she's traveling through time, and she figures out how to fix it, and the doctor can bring her back by using something. But before they can do the treatment, she goes back in time again, and now she's a little kid back on Ocampa. And she's like, dang it. And she turns to her dad and she's like, Dad, I need a treatment of, you know, and she's saying all this stuff. And he's like, oh, sweetie, just go water the plants, right? Because this sounds ridiculous because she looks like she's 12 in human years. So I guess she's like a week old or something, but he's just not trying to hear her. And even if he did hear her, even if he heard her and believed her, he can't do what she's asking. He doesn't have this technology. And then it goes back even further to her being born out of her mother's back. And you're like, well, she's a baby. She really can't do anything now. And then it goes further to like her being like an embryo and being like a blastocyst, like the fertilized egg, and then being like an unfertilized egg and just like darkness and nothing. And then it's like, it fast forwards back into like current time. All is well, all is fine. She's not married to Tom. She doesn't have any kids. And she is like, wow, the whole purpose of that must have been for me to warn everybody about the Krenim or something. That was kind of her take-home message, and also to live in the moment. So what I liked about this episode, especially considering that she leaves the show in season 4, is I like that we get to see who Kes could have been. Even if we don't get to see her skills or any of that stuff, we just get to see her as an old person. I remember like, I always feel that way even on the rewatch. I always feel like it's kind of nice. We get like a where are they now? We get like what could have been, even if we don't see it, just to know that there's a future for her. I think also it's kind of weird to be like, I don't know. It's kind of weird for Tom to be married to like this 80-year-old woman. Does that feel weird or does it not feel weird? Because she turned 80 over the course of like 2 years of their relationship. I'm not really sure. Not sure how that would go. I think for me, I probably just would not date someone who's Ocampan. Like I wouldn't marry them. I wouldn't date them. I just think it's too messy. But that's my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you marry an Ocampan? Let me know. But what I liked about this episode was we learned a lot. We learned about the Ocampans giving birth through their back. We learned about like just what was going on with this time jump. It was a little bit like disorienting, right? Because every time she would figure something out, she'd be like, no. And then she would go back and she'd be like, okay, Captain, I figured this out. No. And she would go back. And so there was something about it that was kind of like, oh man, is she ever going to solve this puzzle? But of course she does. And in the end, everything's fine. So yay. And she gets to keep the glorious hair, which is probably my favorite part of this episode. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we'll go to the next episode on the list. Okay, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says that thing that I wasn't going to put on the screen was an old World of Warcraft reference to rogues who get behind people to do the maximum damage. Okay, well, thanks for that background information. Since I've never played World of Warcraft, I did not know. Nadia says, would Tom really have gone through the Elogium with Kes? Sure, why not? I mean, at the way they said it was that like somehow sadly B'Elanna had died, and so I don't foresee Tom as the kind of person to be alone for the rest of his life in mourning and grief. So I think he would have, for sure. And I also think he's kind of a sweet partner sometimes. I mean, sometimes he's just like self-centered or whatever. Like he's just a regular person. But I think he and Kes could have made a good couple. I think Kes could have like smoothed out his rough edges. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, this is a really cool sci-fi premise. Yeah, so they did an episode kind of like this in TNG. Wasn't even that really stupid episode. Oh my gosh. I was going to say, what was that really stupid episode in season 1? But Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, you told me that could explain a lot of episodes. Too Short a Season. That was the name of it. Too Short a Season, where there was this guy who was really, really old, and then he got younger over the course of the episode because of science, some condition he had. And then he ended up dying anyways at the end. It was just, so the idea was interesting. And I wonder, me and my co-host wondered if that was the inspiration for Benjamin Button, because I think Benjamin Button was excellent. So I'm like, I wonder if this is what kind of inspired that idea. And they just took this idea and made it like work. In this case, I feel like, again, it's one of those rinse and repeat things that Star Trek is known for. But I think it really works in this episode. It's not like that dumb episode, Too Short a Season. This one, you're like, it keeps you engaged, and it makes sense. You're following it. Like, it makes sense that it would be Kes of all people, because she has such a short lifespan that she could be doing all this jumping over the course of like 4 years. Yeah. Wingray says, the timeline is getting erased if Harry Kim has a glimmer of happiness. And how weird is that for like your best friend to also be your son-in-law? Weird. Wingray says, man, I wouldn't want to step on a crack in Ocampan society. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, there's a lot of baggage with Ocampans. I don't think I would marry one. Yeah, I totally agree with you, which is why I wouldn't date one, because I wouldn't want to lead them on, and I wouldn't want my heart to get swept up in something I am not going to commit to. Plus, also, I think I would feel bad. Like, imagine, humans, you date somebody for 6 months, it doesn't work out. You go your separate ways. You date an Ocampan for 6 months, that's like years and years of their life. And you knew you weren't going to stay in this relationship. Like, I would feel a lot of like, I feel a lot of things about dating an Ocampan. Nadia says, ugh, Too Short a Season. Let's be like Worf in DS9 Tribble episode. When they see the old Klingons, let us never speak of it again. Let us never speak of it again. Yeah, that episode is it's so bad. It's hilarious. Okay, let's go to the next episode on the list.
Season 4, Episode 2, The Gift. While 7 of 9 struggles to adjust to life without the Borg, Kes realizes her mental powers are growing beyond her control and putting Voyager in danger. She decides to leave the ship before turning into a being of pure energy. As a parting gift, she gives Voyager a massive push 10 light years closer to home.
So this episode is not great, but it's nice that they give us this, because this is how we're seeing like Kes is no longer going to be in the crew. Kes is no longer going to be on the show. And sometimes when a character leaves the show, not always, but sometimes the character will be killed off, right? Like in some tragic thing, or in the case of Tasha Yar, in some really stupid thing. And I'm glad they didn't do that, because then it's hard to bring the character back for cameos when you kill them off. But also, you don't always have to kill them off. They could just leave. Like, they could just choose to leave, right? Like, they could be, I mean, it doesn't have to be like they're kidnapped and you have to rescue them. They could just choose to leave of their own accord. Or like in season 2 of TNG, when Beverly went back to Starfleet Medical, they could do something like that. Like, they don't always have to die. Now, in this case, in Voyager, it is a little bit trickier because they're all stranded in the Delta Quadrant, and they can't really leave people behind because they all need to make it home. However, Neelix and Kes are from the Delta Quadrant, and 7 of 9 sort of isn't, right? The Borg side of her is. 7 of 9 is from the Delta Quadrant. Annika Hansen is from Earth. So if there was another Ocampan colony of people who weren't crazy, like maybe Kes could have gone off with them, or maybe she could have changed her mind. Now that she's leaving Voyager, she could be like, you know what? I feel good. I'm going to go back to Tanis and the female caretaker. Like, I could do that now. I've experienced what I needed to experience here, and I can go do that. So that would have been fine too. Anyways, what they decide to do with this episode is like, let's kind of show her evolve into her gifts. But she never was able to control these bigger things because no one on the ship can teach her how to do that. And at this point, the way that her body is changing is also changing the ship around her. Like, it's changing the molecular composition of the bulkheads, the walls, the floors, and all these things. And so she's like, this is not safe for the people that I care about, so I need to leave. And what is good about this episode is there's this really teary goodbye between her and Janeway, and like Kay Mulgrew, the actress who plays Janeway, like literally, like she tears up and she cries, and it looks so legit to me. Like, it doesn't look like crying real tears is, I think, very hard to do on cue. But this scene, I was like, oh, like I started getting choked up. I was like, she's really sad in her real life about something that happened in her real life that she's bringing into this episode, into this scene. And so what's nice about that is, as a viewer, we also get to say goodbye to this character. It's not like we show up tomorrow and we're like, where's Kes? Oh yeah, she left for the Ocampan colony yesterday. You know how they used to do that in TNG? They would just be like, where's Troy? Oh, she's at a conference for the next few months. And you're like, oh, okay. But you knew she was coming back. So I like that they gave us a chance to say goodbye by watching other people say goodbye to her. That being said, this whole episode is kind of like, meh. The coolest thing is at the part in the end when she like turns into a light being and she launches the ship away, and it's like very glorious. However, we do have one episode left. And so even though she turned into a light being in that episode, she turned back later, or had the ability to turn back and forth. In the episode of TNG, don't remember the name of it, but it's the one with John Doe where that guy turns into a light being. That seemed very much like a one-way trip. That was his evolution into a new stage for their people. And so he turned into this light being. He still had a humanoid shape, but then he kind of like turned into like a ball of light or whatever and beamed himself off the ship. So it seemed like he had lost his corporeal form forever, but maybe that was just an assumption because Kes comes back with a body. So, okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we will go to the next episode on the list. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, just when Kes was getting good, she's gone. She was really good in season 3. She was growing in season 1, and so was everybody, right? Because it's the first season. So there's just like a lot of kinks to work out and figuring things out. But yeah, she was getting really good. And, you know, the actress had to leave for her own, there was reasons behind the scene, which, you know, many of us know we know all the things we've read and like heard about why that didn't work out. But it's interesting to think like what would the show have been had she stayed? Because if she had stayed, we probably wouldn't have a 7 of 9, which would be sad because I love 7 of 9. Like Janeway and 7 of 9 are 2 of my favorite characters of Star Trek ever, which would have been really sad not to have her. And it would have been, I think, maybe too much to have her and to have Kes, because Kes was the Doctor's guide to humanity and the Doctor was 7's guide to humanity. And I think it would have been weird if Kes was still there. But it does make me wonder, like, what would the show have been like? Maybe that's another what if. What would the show have looked like if Kes had stayed and we never got 7? I think it would not have been, I think it would not have been as popular as it is now. But there you have it. Yeah, so PS2 Chipper, there's a lot of different Okay, so PS2 Chipper says they kill the female stars if they quit, and they keep the female stars alive if they're fired. Well, we did see that happen in TNG. I don't know if that's a Star Trek rule. I don't know if that's a Paramount Plus rule, but we did see that like Tasha Yar was killed off. Beverly Crusher got to come back, but we don't know what the heck happened with Pulaski. So. Wingrace says Kes stays and keep Tuvix. Yeah, what would happen if we had kept Tuvix? Honestly, if we had kept Tuvix, I don't know. Because like back when I was watching the show, I was so horrified that we would lose Neelix and Tuvok. But rewatching as an adult, I'm like, I really like Tuvix. So I had said this before. I'm pretty sure the Doctor could have found a way to separate them and keep Tuvix because he's the freaking Doctor. So if we gave him a few more weeks, he would have figured that out. And that would have been best of all worlds to me, because Tuvix probably would have been my favorite character. Now there would be there would be our love triangle between Tuvix and Neelix and Kes, and maybe Tom would not need to be a part of that story anymore. But the thing that I loved about Tuvix is that he respected Kes's boundaries. When she was like, I'm not ready, he was like, okay. And he just stared at her longingly from across the room. But he wasn't like all like, sweetie, sweetie, like all in her face. So I feel like if she had to make that choice, and of course she'd make the choice for Neelix, that he would respect that decision, even though it would break his heart. Okay, on that note, let's hit the last episode on the list.
Season 6, Episode 23, Fury. An older, angrier Kes comes back to Voyager for revenge. She feels resentment for how her life turned out and travels back in time to take her younger self back to Ocampa. Past Janeway kills older Kes before the Vidians tear them all apart. Younger Kes makes a holographic recording that snaps older Kes out of her revenge spiral in the future. She remembers the good times and realizes this version of her can still go home.
I really like this episode. I loved seeing Kes again. I loved seeing how terrifying she was in this episode. Like when it starts out and she's like, Captain, I need your help. And Janeway's like, whatever you need, Kes, come on. And then all of a sudden she rams the ship and they're like, wait, she's speeding up. Why is she speeding up? And then she like crashes and then you just see like the whole ship coming apart behind her. I love that scene. I just love that scene where it's just like fire and metal peeling and she's looking at people and knocking them over and stuff like that. You're just like, what the heck happened? Like, Kes, what happened on that shuttle that turned you into this? Like, why are you attacking the ship? And then she walks in and she touches the warp core and you're like, maybe you shouldn't touch that. Isn't that like a little toxic or something? And then she disappears and you're like, what the heck? And then she goes into the past to save herself, which I guess is a noble goal, but man, the way she's going about it is she's going to serve up Voyager to the Vidians, which is so messed up. Like, she knows how terrible the Vidians were to Voyager, trying to steal all their organs, but she's like, oh, well, sucks to be you. I'm getting my younger self back to Ocampa where she can be like happy and safe and like cozy and all of these things. And anyways, in the end, Janeway kills her. But when they go back to the future, like, as you saw, young Kes made that recording to be like, hey, you chose to leave the ship. Nobody forced you. That was your choice, and all of that. And so when she comes back the second time and Janeway sees her, it's like, I guess it's like a time temporal paradox sort of situation. Only Janeway and Tuvok and young Kes knew about the situation. Nobody else did. So they worked with young Kes to make the holographic recording, but they didn't tell anybody else what happened. So then on this random day or time when Kes shows up out of the blue and is like, Captain, I need your help. She looks over at Tuvok. She's like, you know what to do. And then they put this whole plan into motion. And everyone's like, what? No, what are you talking about? And they're like, we'll tell you later. And they head off. They clear off all the decks that she was like damaging. They drop their shields so that she doesn't cause more damage or whatever they do. But they like mitigate all the damage. So then when she comes on board, there's like no one in the hallway trying to stop her. There's no security people trying to shoot her. And she's just like, whatever. She's just heading into the engine room. And then she walks into the engine room expecting to see all these people working that she'll need to like, throw from side to side. And there's literally no one, not one single person in engineering. And she's like, what is going on? Like, now it's getting weird. It was empty in the hallway and it's empty in all of engineering. And she's like, okay, well, okay. I can still do what I came here to do. And then the hologram shows up and is like, hey, you made a choice to leave. Voyager did not force you. And she's looking and she goes, I remember making this recording, which is crazy because you would think like making the recording itself might mess up the timeline or something, right? But it doesn't. And she goes, I remember making this recording. Oh my gosh, yes, I remember all those things. I remember what I was thinking and feeling when I made that recording. And then Janeway and Tuvok come in and they're like, hey, are you good? Are we good? And they just have a conversation. And Janeway's just like, I know you really want to take your younger self home to avoid kind of the path that you went through, and you want her to have that sense of home, but you can still go home. And she also says, like, Voyager is your home. If you want to stay here, because at this point, clearly Kes is 9, and she clearly did not go back with the female caretaker because she doesn't look like she's 3. You know, she's clearly 9 at this point. So Janeway's like, you can stay here with us. Like, we're your family. This is your home. Like, you can stay here with us until you die, or you can take yourself back to Ocampa, especially now that she's got all her powers clearly under control. She doesn't have her emotions under control, but she does have her powers under control. And she can take herself back to Ocampa and live out the rest of her days with those people, with her people, if she chooses. It's just a really sweet ending to her story, I feel like. I mean, of course, there's lots of destruction and whatnot, but just for her to be like, to see how far she's come, and then to see that she kind of lost her way, and then to see that she helped herself find her way again, it's just really beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to check the chat, and then we will be done for this week. Windgrace says, we can also keep Tom as a salamander in this timeline. So are we just keeping Tom alone as the salamander? Or are we keeping Tom and Janeway as salamanders? Are we keeping the salamander babies? Like, how far does the salamander situation continue? Windgrace says, while I really like seeing Kes again and the Vidians, I didn't really love the turn her life took. Yeah, and we don't really find out why her life took that turn. Because last time we saw her, she was happy-go-lucky, literally glowing in her spaceship, right? She was like, I'm going to give you a gift because I can see the world, right? So it seemed like everything was going to go really great. So it's like, what happened between that time and this time that made her blame Voyager for everything that's ever gone wrong? Because up until this point, she hasn't had a lot go wrong. I mean, she's had all the stuff go wrong that goes wrong on Voyager, but she had a whole crew of people who were experiencing the same wrongs. Right. So what happened to her in the middle? And I'm actually glad that we don't find that out, because it would have to be something pretty horrible, right, for her mind to become so twisted, or like a series of horrible things. I don't really know. Yeah. PS2 Chipper says, you never want to see a woman that angry in real life, like angry enough to literally burn everything down. You never want to see anybody that just mad and bitter and, yeah, just disconnected from anything that brings them any kind of joy. Anyways, okay. With that being said, I want to say thank you so much to everyone who came live, and thank you to everybody who is watching on the replay. This is a fun one. I want to do, so last time I said I was going to do all the pilots. I'm not going to do that because there's just too many. There's too many. I might do it someday. I'm not going to do it today. But I do want to kind of do like top 10s going through Voyager now, and some of the bridge crew and like characters I love, and like we're just gonna have a good time. So excited to have you. Thank you so much for coming, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Night.